Let's go to London. We can bring in the former advisor to the Saudi government, Nawaf Obaid, senior political scientist, security analyst, known for his work on the Middle East strategic affairs, and currently visiting senior research fellow at the Department of War Studies at King's College London. Welcome to France 24. It's great to have you on the programme tonight. First of all,
thank you for having me, Gavin.
I know the last couple of days there's been the GCC meeting, the 6 countries, calibrating a response. What are you making of what's come out of that? Is it purely on how to better defend, or is there a sense of actually the Saudi view here, which is not, and perhaps you can explain it better, the idea of reserving the right to strike back?
So it's been, as you correctly asserted, it's been more of being caught between what's happening and what you didn't preempt. And in that way, it's I would better characterize it as strategic patience. Saudi Arabia finds itself in a very different position than the other Gulf states because of its scale, because of its weight, and so forth. And recently, as you correctly alluded, the former Qatari Prime Minister alluded to a NATO-style union or military union headed by Saudi Arabia. But then again, you got to get the buy-ins from all the other Gulf states that recently, as I'm sure you're aware, have had different opinions on different other regional issues. On the issue of Iran, is as your correspondent in Jerusalem very accurately portrayed it, it is a problem of what the Iranians can still muster and what they can respond with. And I have to correct back to what was originally said. What hasn't been carefully alluded to is the fact that if the Iranians decide to use their end of their high-end missile, which are in this case an intermediate ballistic missile, they are of a technology and of a variant that will prove very hard for the existing air defense systems, as extensive and as sophisticated as they are, for example, in the case of Israel or of Saudi Arabia, to be able to apprehend. And you've seen that very well yesterday, for example. It wasn't an issue of not being able to apprehend it, but it is the fact that they are of a very high quality, and they're using new technologies that the air defense systems, as we know it, will find very hard to stop.
So one thing that interests, I think, a lot of people listening to you, and we think about the Ras Laffan gas facility for liquid natural gas in Qatar struck, the critical sense of that on a world level, the consequence, I think, 17% of that could have been stopped potentially for 5 years.
Correct.
But we can talk about this being kind of a wild response from Iran and its kind of mosaic defence with 30 or so regions doing their own thing. But it's not. It's probably worth pointing out that right now the Saudi oil fields have been left intact, and that is a big critical factor that must be on the minds of the Saudi government. What's your
Correct.
summation of that? That really comes into the calibration of how Saudi responds, doesn't it?
Well, correct. I mean, in that way, there has been. Iran and Saudi Arabia have had this entente, as you call it, this understanding, for the last few years about how they interact with one another. Very different from how the other Gulf states have. But in this way, it's again, the Iranians are very realistic, and they clearly had planned this war in terms of how they were going to respond. Now, they know very well that in terms of scale, for example, the Saudi Air Force or the Saudi Strategic Missile Force could do existential damage to a lot of their basic energy infrastructure. So in that way, it's been quite smart to be sending across these low-level ballistic missiles as well as these drones, that because of Saudi Arabia's extensive air defense system, they've been, to 99% have been able to be blown up. But the question that should be on everyone's mind is what happens if they actually do use one of the missiles that they used, for example, yesterday on Israel or on Diego Garcia on one of Saudi Arabia's oil assets. Then that will obviously completely change the balance and the understanding here. And in this case, you would expect that there would be a sizable, if not a massive, Saudi response.
When we talk about this kind of recent debate, probably the best word for it. It's not any kind of formalised arrangement going on at the moment, but the idea of a Gulf-style NATO. I mentioned at the top, this is not the first time, but certainly it appears to be revived now, as you said, with Qatari officials suggesting this. Can we just try to frame that into a likelihood context here, in relation to events? We're talking about Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Oman, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar. And Qatar, in inverted commas, has been on the naughty step previously for its been seen as hosting extremist Islamist groups, for its influence with Al Jazeera. There have been certainly breakaways from Saudi Arabia, Egypt and others, and that's kind of morphed again and brought together by this common crisis. Where do you see the idea of more of a military alliance between the GCC? Do you see that as a reasonable likelihood?
I mean, Gavin, if you're asking me on the pure military aspect of it, then yes, it is very feasible. Why? Because the weapons, they're very similar. In most cases, they're identical. For example, let's take their defense system, identical. On the Air Force, the planes that are being flown, again, very similar, and they could be coordinated. They could have set up a joint command structure, a fused command structure. So, and you have, if you want, the beginnings of it, which you have this Peninsula Sheared Force led by a Saudi general that usually goes around training in the various Gulf states. So you have the foundations of it. Now, you have to step out of the military aspect and get into the political aspect. And the question will be, will these Gulf states be willing and comfortable to have such military NATO style with Saudi Arabia sitting at the center of it? And that's where the question lies.
Saudi Arabia almost becomes the US of NATO, into which we look at the US at the moment. And your contacts within government, can you give us an idea of the thinking about the US umbrella, given that we're seeing these strikes taking place? Is it fair to say the surprise, shock, disappointment? How would you surmise the feeling, particularly within the Saudi government right now?
I mean, in terms of how it was thought of, first, it wasn't properly coordinated. The US didn't really coordinate anything, and the shock would be, especially for people in government and people that follow it very closely, like what I do with my students and with my colleagues here at War Studies, is how ill-prepared they were for Iran's response. So coming back to your question about umbrella, for a country like Saudi Arabia, I just don't think it's feasible. The smaller countries will obviously, they've already come out and said that they wish to have even a stronger partnership with the US, which is understandable. But for a country of the weight of Saudi Arabia, I don't think that's feasible anymore going forward. The kingdom will have to have its own standalone doctrine. And with that will it be a doctrine that will not only encompass the kingdom, but also other countries within the region, and not especially the Gulf states. You still have Yemen, where Saudi Arabia now has taken over the security there. You have Somalia, you have even to the north. So you have a lot of things ongoing that will be preempting a significant change, in my opinion.
There's something that I've noticed in the past few days. There is language in the extremists that I haven't heard before from politicians and advisors, particularly in Europe. For example, I was listening to Natasha Tocci today, former advisor to Josep Borrell, the former foreign affairs chief at the EU. She described it as the commencement of World War III. Now, that seems extreme. This is certainly a war of global consequences right now. And the one thing that was mentioned as well by a number of analysts in the US is the idea that there are reports China is able to manufacture some of these Shahed drones, not just Russia and Iran, but China too. Now, that's not proven. But I'd like your take on that. And just when this is an area that you've looked at for a long time, particularly in the Middle East. How would you categorize the scale of the conflict right now?
The scale of the conflict for the time being is still being mitigated because you still have, ultimately it boils down to economics and energy. And as long as you have the Saudi exports coming out from the Red Sea, you are mitigating the rise in prices. And at the same time, you're seeing that there is an off-ramp in terms of how fast the global economy and the energy economy can come back into gear. The issue here, and what she was alluding to, is what happens if For example, Ras Tanura and Abqaiq, which are the two world largest oil exporting and oil processing plants in the world, are hit. Then you'll have a complete collapse of Saudi export, and that's when you get into territories where that kind of rhetoric will become will become normalized, and that's where we are today.
Really good to hear your thoughts tonight, Nawaf. I'm looking forward to talking to you again soon. Let's see where we are in a few weeks' time. Thank you for your time. Nawaf Obaid, former advisor to the Saudi government, senior
thank
political
you for having
scientist.
me.
Thank you.